of all, it is so great to be here for this celebration of writing for stories, for fiction in the New Yorker. Someone started to clap. You can do that if you want to. I'll just pretend that it's for me. I will say that as a teenager, long before I ever published in the New Yorker, I desperately wanted to become a writer. And I would recall certain passages of stories in the New Yorker. And I don't know if all of you probably are readers of New Yorker, but if you've noticed this one little kind of house style that they have, in which a word, when it has a double vowel, will then have a sort of umlaut over the second one. And only later did I realize, I won't tell you how recent actually it was, but did I realize it's not an umlaut, it is a diaeresis, or as someone else said, it actually is diaeresis, like matching with heresies. And I would say that one of the things that would happen is that I became obsessed with these kinds of little house styles and little ways in which the New Yorker would have, in its fiction, and probably as much as the fiction itself. And I'll just give you an example. So instead of putting a dash in something like cooperation, they would have C-O, and then O, and then what looks like the umlaut, but it is really diaheresis. And over the second vowel. Okay, so, I became obsessed with writing, and I kind of kept thinking, if I can only kind of master, New Yorker style, then maybe I'll become an actual real writer. And so this would lead to some crazy types of experiences and experiments that I would have. So for instance, I was really very much into Nabokov and Toni Morrison, so I'd write a story, like just blatantly ripping off Nabokov, something like, unlike the beady death by rain of the former day, today, she was told, was just the right day for sailing. And I had not been sailing. I didn't really know, but I barely had been on the water. None of that stuff. But I was like, okay, this is going to be like Spring in Fialta. Or another one, and I even called it's a whole ass story called Here We Are Smiling. I've never sent it anywhere because everyone would just laugh at it. And a second one where I was just trying to think be like Toni Morrison. The city fell and everyone made love on the steps of the Prudential building. They muzzled their heads into the necks of anyone these are actual words that I wrote. Thank you for allowing me because they're that ridiculous. And I think I called them with something like, and love isn't one of them. And of course, none of that was, published either. But I kept thinking, if I could write these stories like these people and add, a couple of umlauts or something, then I would be a writer. I kind of ignored, one of my favorite writers who presented some sage advice. And this is the great Lori Moore. She is now with my colleague. And I always refer to her as the great Lori Moore whenever I'm introducing her to the class. And she wrote a story called How to Become a Writer. And it begins like this. First, try to be something, anything else. A movie star / astronaut, a movie star / missionary, a movie star / kindergarten teacher, president of the world. Fail miserably. It is best if you fail at an early age, say 14. Thank you for Lori Moore. I didn't write it. Lori Moore did. And I did not pay attention to any of this advice, as wise as it was. I just kept trying to write and kept trying. And eventually, I got accepted to the Iowa Writers Workshop, which bills itself as the oldest workshop in the country, and I don't think anyone really has checked that or cares or just let them have it. And so with the Iowa Workshop, I got to back up a little bit because years later, after getting accepted, I don't know if you guys remember the show Girls. Yeah, no, you do. I actually loved Girl. I kept thinking, okay, it's like, Sex in the City, but, 20s. And Hannah Horvath is also trying to be a writer, and for this reason, I think she ripped me off, even though she can't possibly know me. She's a fictional character. But Lena Dunham, wrote about Hannah Horvath going to the Iowa Writers Workshop And and I just recall being incensed. I mean, I saw these episodes, and you could just tell that the show is trying to be as trying to make the workshop be as catty and as awful and crazy and oddball as possible. And I was just a little offended because I was like, the workshop is 1,000 times more catty and dramatic and oddball than anything that they had shown on Girls. And I'll just give you a little example. Like the first day of the workshop, our director, Frank Conroy, I don't know if you know who Frank Conroy is, the author of Body and Soul, amazing novel, the author of Stop Time, amazing collection, just a fantastic writer, a jazz musician, and just one of the best directors ever. But also, he ran it like a boot camp. He would bring us all there, he would make some remarks, and here we are, 100 young, impressionable writers, and he would say, after a while, how many of you are writers? And then we're like, it's a trick question. And then we would slowly raise our hands. And then he was like, well, why aren't you all at home writing? And so we were like, okay, well, you called this mandatory meeting. But this was the kind of thing that Frank would do. And he was known as being one of the hardest, sternest workshop leaders. And so, of course, being a masochist, I signed up for him. And proceeded to understand what the workshop was all about. And so signed up, and that is where the pain began. One of the first workshops, someone goes up, and everyone has written these stories, and some of them have written before we came to the workshop, and he just holds up this story. Instead of just like reading it or having someone go first or having someone read an excerpt, he would hold it up and then tear off the first page and let it fall to the ground. And then, you'd be looking like, well, what is he doing? And then he'd tear off the next page, then page 3, then page 4. And maybe on page 5 or 6, he would kind of nod his head and say, okay, I think you can begin the story here. And that's what it was like. We all just lived in terror of having that happen to our stories. Or, after a while, we kind of like tried to gang up and provide a kind of defense. And then we'd be like, okay, well, I actually like that paragraph. Or, I actually thought this image was okay. And he'd be like, no. Does it follow? And he had 3 criteria: meaning, sense, and clarity. And anyone who has been to the workshop, at least in fiction, will know this sort of meaning, sense, and clarity, because if you did not abide by meaning, sense, and clarity, meaning it had to mean what it said. It had to make sense, and it had to be clear. And you would think, oh my God, everything makes sense. I mean, it's a story. No, you would then read something like, and I'm not going to now use one of my own examples. Oh, here's an example from a student. And it went a little bit like this. Silence became a fourth presence in the dark space we inhabited, an undesirable guest who came unexpectedly at the most unwelcome time. The door closed, blonde strays fell to the ground in a romantic gesture of nonchalance as our world once again came crashing down. So then Frank would go into silence. Silence? Is that the best you could do? A fourth presence? Is it a ghost? Is this a body? Is this a person? In the presence of the dark space we inhabit? Are we in outer space? Are we in a hollow? Are we in a closet? Are we in a ship's hold? And he would continue on like that. Undesirable. How can a guest be undesirable? How can a guest be undesirable and unwelcome and unexpected at the same time? And so this was how, thank you. This was Frank. And so then you're looking at every single sentence with this. Okay, can I say he had no choice because I listed 2 choices? You would do that kind of thing. And then these Frankisms would begin to live in your head. So I don't know what else to say except that many of us had breakdowns, and many of us severely doubted our purpose for being there, or if we could continue to be there. But after a while, it began to sort of feel as though, okay, it might seem like a straitjacket to some people, but to others, it's sort of like, okay, here are these rules that you wanted. Here's this guidance. If you did this, then you got that, and you became competent. And this obsession with language and with making sense and creating that and making sure that every sentence meant what it said, then kind of flowed out into everyone else, and including our visiting guests. And this is maybe a apocryphal story, but Barry Hannah, I don't know if how many people know the writer Barry Hannah, Mississippi writer, he's passed now, but he came to the workshop, and the rumor was that someone in one student in his class had written a story. The story is very, someone had been held up at gunpoint, and this person acted heroically or passively, or just not scared. And so Barry Hannah let the workshop give its comments, talk about the story, and then when it came his time to speak, whipped out a gun and said to the student, who by this point had surely pissed his pants, "This is what it feels like for a gun to be held to your head. This is what it feels like. So, sir, that's what you need to write it like." Yeah, this is just. I only have 10 minutes, so I can't go into all the stories. But what I will say is the students were just all part of this as well. We would have parties every week, and at least 2 of them involved outright fights about punctuation. And so this was just the milieu in which we lived. I will say, after a while, when you have 100 people and they're writers and they're all together and they're in Iowa and they've taken a risk with tornadoes every other month coming and crashing down, or then living adjacent to cornfields or being black in Iowa, then you have made a pretty big sacrifice. But what I will say is that Hannah Horvath or Lena Dunham and girls, I would say that, yes, it was 1,000 times more brutal than she could have ever portrayed it. But we were obsessive and we loved it. And this passion is what drove us to become better writers. So it wasn't all about the rules, although, it helped. But it really was about who can sustain being here and care enough about writing that they're willing to risk their years arguing over punctuation, meticulously underlining sentences, lying at the feet of our author sort of gods who we just loved coming to campus. So even though the workshop was 1,000 times more brutal, it also was worth it 1,000 times over. Thank you.